I'm an editor. I edit feature films and web series. And a lot of my work has centered around crafting the female gaze through editing. Editors are responsible for putting together footage after it's been filmed. So, in many ways, we are the first audience, and in many ways, we determine what the final audience, you, will watch. The perception is that we simply cut and join shots, maybe add a cool effect or two. But what editors are really doing is building a film's reality. This reality is subjective, selective, even manipulative, because we are choosing what to show you and what to leave out. And in doing so, we quietly plant ideas, good ideas, bad ideas, some harmless, some powerful enough to alter your worldview. And so, we are manufacturing how reality is seen. Of course, writing, direction, cinematography all build a solid foundation by means of the script and the rushes. But editing is where all those choices are finally organized into experience. A powerful example of this manufactured experience is what feminist theorist Laura Mulvey has referred to as the male gaze. The male gaze in cinema is inherently voyeuristic, and it reduces women to images. And that's why it's a problem. Because there is an erasure of the female experience. It treats women as objects, not as subjects. Often we hear filmmakers defend the film gaze, the male gaze, by saying, but that's how real life is. My film is just mirroring real life. And so, the male gaze in cinema gets the chance to operate within this very convenient loophole of art imitates life. But we forget that life also imitates art. So during in my 20s and one of my early gigs as a young editor, I was asked to cut a music video using some footage they had shot of girls in bikinis. And I was told to incorporate multiple angles of what they call body shots. So shots of female navels and torso and legs and all of that, which I liberally sprinkled through the edit. The producer loved it. I felt validated. And just like that, I was officially inducted into this male gaze school of editing. The uncomfortable truth is, I bought into it because I was rewarded for it. And that's how a power structure works. And within this structure, women were to be introduced through dismemberment, a series of body parts, eyes, lips, torsos, legs, sometimes even shown adjusting their underwear. This gaze had been carefully trained. It had been crafted over and over again, year after year. And that reflected both on and off screen. On screen, acceptable women characters were either the perfect mother, the devoted sister, wife, girlfriend, fantasy manic pixie dream girl, or victims to be avenged. All these women existed solely to service the male subject's journey. Meanwhile, off screen, the way men watched women in films spilled into how men watch women in real life. I saw it in the way groups of men checked out women, that visual scanning. Apparently, it was meant to be received as a compliment. One time, I even heard a group of my male friends casually rating women on a scale of 1 to 10, also apparently meant to be taken as a compliment. And I began to understand that when a gaze is crafted, it doesn't just shape films, it shapes how people learn to see each other. Around 2017, I was hired for a web series called Four More Shots, Please. It was about four women navigating female friendships, career challenges, flawed choices, messy relationships, and life in a big city. In a somewhat radical act, much of the series centered around female pleasure. Also, the team, including all the key heads of department, was largely women. Again, a rarity. One of the first things the showrunners, Rongita and Ishita, said to me was, traditionally in cinema, sex is something that is done to a woman. With this show, we want to flip that script. So, editorially, I was asked to prioritize the female gaze, and we all did just that. By changing the way we wrote, changing the way we filmed, and by changing the way we edited. For instance, during intimate moments, we held the shots longer on the women to underline female pleasure. Sometimes we held the shots longer on both partners. So pleasure wasn't one directional but shared. Similarly, during moments of indecision and vulnerability and weakness, we didn't dismiss the interiority of the women by quickly cutting away from them. We stayed with them. Now, when the show released, there was massive backlash. The four characters were called loose, flaky, selfish, because suddenly people were confronted with uncomfortable questions. How do you box these women into a category now? They were no longer defined by the traditional roles of mother, sister, wife, girlfriend, victim. They were no longer defined by a male relationship. The status quo did not appreciate the challenge. And yet, hundreds of women wrote in saying that for the first time, they felt seen as messy, complicated, multidimensional subjects. This was female gaze in action, not as textbook theory, but shaped by practice. Now, during an editing workshop I recently conducted, some students and I were discussing a scene from one of the episodes of Delhi Crime Season 3. A trafficked woman, abused and coerced into marriage, finally burns down her husband's farmland. One of the students, a young man, said this scene of her burning her husband's farmland made her less likable. And if the scene were deleted, she would be more likable. Now, this comment echoes a familiar pattern. We are deeply conditioned to accept women's suffering, but deeply uncomfortable with women's rage, which is why when we capture her rage on film and then we choose to stay with that rage in edit, when we choose not to cut it out to make her likable, then every editorial decision begins to feel like a small win for the female gaze. I take great inspiration from Satyajit Ray's Charulata, which had been instrumental in establishing an early iteration of the female gaze. I think one of the rare instances when a male director actively tried to portray a woman's inner monologue and how she perceived and engaged with the world around her. But such portrayals are few and far between. So choosing interiority itself becomes political. And in editing, this interiority can be crafted. It can be crafted through duration, silence, and intentional choices. So what does the female gaze actually look like when it is crafted through editing? I'll give you 3 examples from my work. In Modern Love Mumbai's Raat Rani, we had 2 options to begin the film. We had a close-up on the female protagonist that we could use, or a 2-shot of the protagonist and her husband. We chose to begin the film with an extended stay on the protagonist, Lal Zari's face, excluding her husband entirely, because this was her story, her point of view, her interior world. The gaze was being anchored in her experience. In FOMO Shot Season 4, we chose to stay with Anjana on her balcony. It was a pacing that isn't usual to the quick cutting of streaming shows, but this wasn't a look at her moment. This was a feel with her moment. Time itself was being expanded to draw you into her world. In the short film Grey, we intentionally chose to break away from the linearity of the script. This film follows a woman as she recollects a particularly traumatic experience, and drawing on the shared lived experience of women, we felt trauma is rarely recalled in a linear manner. So we reshaped the film into a non-linear memory flow. The female experience, therefore, was crafted in the edit. So the female gaze is not about making women admirable or virtuous. It is about allowing them to be real, even when they are uncomfortable or angry or unlikable. So editing doesn't just shape story, it can shape how audiences look. A film's footage may reflect a reality, but editing has the power to bend, shift, and refract it. And this refraction has the power to start conversations, to disrupt dominant systems, to create safe spaces for women, on and off screen. Because how we look eventually becomes how we live. Thank you.